Grifco.
This video contains spoilers for the 2001 game Pikmin by Nintendo, so I would recommend experiencing it yourself before watching this. Pikmin is a game renowned for its solid and expertly designed mechanics. From the very start, it establishes a clear objective: collect 30 ship parts in 30 days, or the player character Olimar's life support systems will fail. But strangely, later on in the game, it's cryptically revealed that possibly not all 30 parts are required to escape the planet. It's only after the player runs out of days that they discover if they've reached this ambiguous quota, indicated by whether or not they successfully take off in the final cutscene. In reality, that criteria is only 25 of the ship parts are mandatory to escape, while the other 5 are not. However, even this is unclearly conveyed and only at the end of the game. This is often seen as an odd design choice and with little narrative reason, as many parts one would expect to be unnecessary are required, the biggest offenders being a seat and 2 souvenirs from Olimar's kids. This may lead one to jump to conclusions on the feature. Perhaps it's a last-minute leniency added when playtesters found the game too difficult, and is poorly implemented due to lack of direction in an otherwise mechanically compact game. Here are some examples of different players' opinions. First, a complete newcomer.
So how does this make you feel? The parts
I really fail as a person.
But what about the parts you don't need? How does that make you feel?
Parts I don't need. I don't need a lot of parts. There's so many parts I don't need.
What do you think this implies about the game? The game mechanics. What do you think this is trying to tell you? Is there any clarity?
No. I lost 63 Pikmin in battle. This is humor. This is humor to you.
And a seasoned Pikmin expert. Michael, you've played Pikmin more times than me and have finished the game in single-digit numbers of days. What are your opinions on the optional ship parts?
Oh, thank you. I think they just don't really matter to the game's design at all. They're kind of required because if you get all the required parts in time, then you might as well go for the optional. And B, you don't know the optionals until you actually finish the game. So I think the neutral ending is just more of a haphazardly slapped together Easter egg than a game design thing.
I see.
It's like fighting the Smoky Frog. You don't have to do it, but it's a part of the game if you want to.
However, I will argue this is an expertly crafted ingredient in line with the rest of Pikmin's design, as, on top of forgiving newcomers, it coaxes the player into seeing Olimar's fate when he fails and encourages replayability. The goal of these seemingly strange dev choices is to subtly nudge the player to fight till the end, even if they're set on losing. For instance, in a world without these optional parts, instead of playing through, someone doing badly towards the last 10 days might consider switching to a copied save, or even restarting entirely, which is reasonable due to the game's replayability and short length. After all, realizing there's likely no way you can win after making some poor decisions early on can leave little reason to continue, other than morbid curiosity of what happens upon failure, which, in most games of the era, would be a standard game over screen. However, Olimar's mentions of optional parts encourage the player to test their luck with the ending, as they truly don't know if they'll succeed or not due to the quota's ambiguity. On that note, the info is typically shown later on in a playthrough, to not muddy up the urgency of getting as many parts as possible. Its main source is Olimar's voyage log, which often introduces the idea when he writes, "Surely there are some parts that are not absolutely necessary. If my ship is not completed by day 30, the only way I will find out is to try to lift off." This brings up the concept, prompting the player to wonder how they can win without all parts, but with little details. In another log, he says, "I even started thinking there were some parts I do not need. A daydream." Which again gives no hint which or even how many parts are unneeded. If the player only has a handful of parts yet to obtain, he says, "Even if I cannot recover every piece, I will not give up. Surely some of those parts aren't absolutely necessary," telling the player not to give up by aborting their save file, even if they're projected or even know they can't get all 30 in the remaining days. He says it again on day 29, explaining that, "Missing a few parts may not affect my attempts to return to Hokotate, but then again, it may." reminding the player at the most relevant time that things might work out, even if they're not certain if they'll get them all or not. Another source of this information are some of the comments Olimar makes when discovering parts. The Omega Stabilizer in Interstellar Radio, although mandatory, have Olimar say, "I should be able to fly again," even if he doesn't collect all 30, and "I get the impression not all parts are needed to fly the ship," respectively. However, only one of the 5 actually optional parts, the UV lamp, allude to this feature, with Olimar doubting it'll affect his escape from the planet. Although he says the optional space float is only needed for emergencies, since it's missing the yellow text associated with the feature, it's fair to discount this. The fact there's more mentions on mandatory parts shows how these give no help in distinguishing the true criteria any further, and has actually led some players into mistaking the stabilizer in radio for being optional, as well as the aforementioned souvenirs in Pilot's Seat, proving how the developers intentionally gave as little hints on how it works as possible. In fact, the one place Olimar describes the feature with certainty is at the end of Day 30, where he says, "I have no choice but to attempt to launch the Dolphin into space, incomplete as it is. The ship doesn't need every lost part in order to fly. For better or worse, I must go." This is the only instance in the entire game where Olimar outright states not all parts are needed, rather than describing it as a hopeful thought, and it's when it's already too late. The wording of "surely" and "may" up to this point is intentional, as it keeps the incentive to urgently get all 30, but in this case it's already out of the player's hands. On that note, the physical parts themselves are provided late game, so the player doesn't waste time collecting unneeded ones until they've gotten most already, avoiding a frustrating loss. For instance, most of the optional parts, the massage machine, UV lamp, and secret safe, are found in the last 2 areas out of the 5. Out of parts with comments on unnecessary pieces, the stabilizer is found in the 3rd area, while the radio and again the lamp are found in the 4th. Also to note is the safe, being the final part, will typically take at least 2 days to beat, even without its weight of 85 in the original Japanese version, due to it being in its own dedicated area. Thus, this one part often takes a couple days to get, increasing the player's chances of getting the neutral ending. Although minor, it also means you can only get a maximum of 28 parts and lose, rather than 29, which is less potentially frustrating. Thus, the parts are carefully placed in the game, showing how deliberate this feature is. Similar to the positron generator coaxing the player into finding out the impact site is great at making more Pikmin, this feature coaxes the player into seeing the game's imperfect endings. The final results menu is the only place that specifies the quota, but even it is done unclearly, especially if the player is lacking many parts. Although the optional pieces are at the end of the list and have blue instead of yellow text, there is no indication or key that says what the colors mean. On top of this, a part's name and proper icon only appear when it's collected. This might again seem strange, but even this setup serves a deliberate role. If the player gets the bad ending for the first time, it's unlikely they'll figure out what blue means since they wouldn't have taken off. Thus, the ambiguity is preserved, and the player will continue to retry in hopes they'll get it right. This once again maintains the importance of getting as many parts as possible, since which ones are mandatory is still a mystery. But, if they get extremely close to all mandatory ones, it's more likely they'll piece it together and notice the yellow ones are more important. On the other hand, if they get the good ending, the player won't try to figure it out since they've already won. Unlike the other endings, the neutral one is almost guaranteed to have the player realize. But even then, they'd have to somehow document the parts outside the game as you can't look back at the end screen, only your scores. Essentially, this menu barely gives a hint and maintains the ambiguity, unless the player has tried multiple times, or has gotten the neutral ending, and is rewarded with this info. These methods combined allow the player to have a belief of optional parts later in the game, but in a nebulous way, encouraging them to replay and gradually figure it out with experience. And this is even with the large amount of player freedom in Pikmin, showing how this was deliberately done and not for no reason. In conclusion, optional ship parts on Pikmin are a great feature. It is not to say it has minor flaws, such as narrative delusion through silly mandatory parts, but this is the small cost for this aspect of the game. The confusion they cause is not a drawback, but rather an essential part of their design. The fact their purpose remains subtly hidden shows how well the feature succeeds. They coax new players into accidentally getting the surprising twist of the bad ending, encourage replayability, and add leniency to newcomers. and this proves they're very carefully and cleverly implemented, just like the many other design elements of Pikmin.